Americans do not want this.
The missiles hit American bases across the Gulf. The U.S. Embassy evacuation order went out. And somewhere in New York City, Zohran Mamdani's phone started ringing. Because a few days ago, the mayor of New York City stood in front of the entire country and said something that almost no elected official in America was willing to say out loud. He called the strikes on Iran a catastrophic escalation. He said it was an illegal war of aggression. He said Americans do not want this. He said the word peace in a political climate where that word has become something close to a liability. And the response was savage. Ted Cruz came for him. Nancy Mace came for him. Conservative media ran the story for 2 straight news cycles. The message from the right was clear and coordinated. Stay in your lane, fix your city, and stop pretending a mayor has any business commenting on foreign policy. Now, the missiles are in the air. The embassy is being evacuated. The region is moving towards something that looks less like a military operation and more like a war with no defined endpoint. So let us ask the question directly. Was Mamdani right? And here is the harder question underneath that one. The question that will actually determine his legacy as mayor, that will shape his relationship with 8 million constituents, and that will decide whether this moment becomes the thing that defines him or the thing that limits him. Does being right matter? If being right costs your city more than being wrong. You need to watch this to the end, because what has happened in the days since Mamdani posted that statement, the escalation he predicted, the political attacks that followed, the federal pressure building behind closed doors, and the very real consequences headed toward New York City, tells a story that is far more complicated than either his supporters or his critics want to acknowledge. This is not a story about whether Mamdani is brave. It is a story about whether bravery and governance can coexist in the same office at the same time. And the answer to that question is not what either side wants to hear. If you are new to this channel, subscribe now and hit the bell icon. This story is not slowing down. Every development will be here. Let's go back to the beginning, because the full picture matters. The United States military, operating alongside Israeli forces, conducted airstrikes on Iran. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. In Washington, the operation was immediately framed as decisive, historic, and necessary. The political class largely fell in line. Republicans celebrated. Most Democrats said very little. The machine of American political messaging did what it always does after a military operation. It consolidated around the narrative of strength and waited for the public reaction to settle. That is the room Mamdani walked into when he posted his statement. He did not wait. He did not consult with National Party leadership. He did not run the language through a team of communications advisors trained to sand every sharp edge off a political statement until it means nothing. He wrote what he believed, posted it under his own name, and let it stand. The words were not subtle. Catastrophic escalation, illegal war of aggression, bombing cities, killing civilians, opening a new theater of war. He ended with the word peace. He said Americans want relief from the affordability crisis. He connected the cost of war to the cost of living in one paragraph, in plain language without qualification. The backlash arrived within hours. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, positioned himself as the voice of outrage. Cruz has never run a city. He has never negotiated a municipal budget. He has never had a constituent knock on his door because their rent doubled and their subway is broken and they do not know how they are going to make it through the month. But he had a microphone and a target. Nancy Mace, representative from South Carolina, wrote the line that conservative media amplified across every platform. It takes a particular kind of audacity or ignorance for a city mayor to appoint himself the conscience of American foreign policy, while his constituents step over garbage on their way to work. History will not remember his bravery. It will not remember him at all. That sentence was designed to do one thing: not to rebut Mamdani's argument, not to explain why the strikes were legal, not to address the question of civilian casualties or the constitutional framework around military operations conducted without congressional authorization. It was designed to make Mamdani look small, to reduce a foreign policy position to a garbage collection problem, to tell him and everyone watching that a mayor does not get to speak about these things. It was effective. For about 72 hours, the story was about Mamdani's overreach, not about the substance of what he said. And then the missiles hit American bases across the Gulf. The U.S. Embassy evacuation order went out. Reports began coming in of Iranian strikes on multiple American military positions in the region. The thing that Mamdani called a new theater of war had a name now, and coordinates and casualty reports and the kind of breaking news chyrons that mean something real is happening. Now we have to ask the harder questions. And I am going to be direct with you, because this channel does not deal in simple vindication narratives. Mamdani predicted the escalation. The escalation happened, but the story does not end there, and anyone telling you it does is selling you something. Start with what is true, because the truth is the only foundation worth building on. Mamdani was correct about the direction of events. When he used the phrase opening a new theater of war, he was not being hyperbolic. He was describing with reasonable accuracy what a strike that kills the supreme leader of Iran was likely to produce. Military and foreign policy analysts had been saying for years that a direct strike of this magnitude on Iran would not end the conflict. It would expand it. It would trigger a response. It would pull more actors into a wider regional confrontation. That is not a controversial analytical position. It is mainstream foreign policy thinking. The fact that Mamdani said it out loud from a mayor's office, while most of official Washington was applauding, does not make it wrong. The missiles falling on American bases in the Gulf are the direct continuation of what Mamdani described as a catastrophic escalation. The embassy evacuation is not a sign that the operation achieved its strategic objectives and everyone is going home. It is a sign that the region is volatile, that American personnel are in danger, and that whatever comes next is going to require decisions that nobody in Washington fully prepared for. On the substance, Mamdani was right. Hold that thought. Because now I am going to tell you where he made a serious mistake. And this one matters just as much. The mistake was not what he said. The mistake was what he gave away by saying it the way he said it, at the moment he said it. When Mamdani posted that statement in the immediate hours after the strikes, the information environment was incomplete. Casualty figures were unconfirmed. The scope of the operation was still being established. The legal arguments, which are real, which are substantive, which deserve serious public debate, had not yet been organized into anything the general public could evaluate. He had the right instinct and the wrong timing. Here is why that matters practically, not just politically. By posting that quickly, with that much certainty, using language that inflammatory, Mamdani handed Ted Cruz and Nancy Mace the one thing they needed: a distraction. Instead of the national conversation being about the legality of the strikes, the lack of congressional authorization, the civilian casualties, and the predictable regional escalation, the national conversation became about whether a New York City mayor should be commenting on foreign policy at all. Cruz and Mace did not win that argument on the merits. They did not have to. Mamdani's timing and framing handed them enough material to change the subject, and they took it immediately, loudly, effectively. The result is that for the first 48 hours, after a major military operation that raised serious constitutional and humanitarian questions, the dominant political story was not about those questions. It was about Mamdani's lane. That is a loss, not for Mamdani personally, but for the public conversation that needed to happen. A politician with Mamdani's instincts and platform has the ability to force that conversation into the open. but only if the delivery does not give opponents a side door to escape through. He left that door wide open. Now I need to stop for a second. If you have watched this far, please like this video. I am serious. This is not a performance request. The algorithm determines who sees this content, and this conversation, the honest, complicated version of it, not the version where everyone picks a team and cheers, needs to reach more people. Write your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Mamdani's timing hurt the very argument he was trying to make? Or does timing not matter when the stakes are this high? I read every comment. Let us have the real conversation, because here's the layer that nobody in media is covering, and this one does not stay in the realm of foreign policy. This one comes directly to New York City, to your rent, to your subway, to the services your tax dollars are supposed to fund. Ted Cruz and Mace are not just pundits. They are not just commentators with large followings who said mean things about the mayor of New York on social media. They are federal legislators. They sit on committees. They cast votes on appropriations. They have relationships with colleagues who also cast votes on appropriations. And the federal government sends money to New York City for infrastructure, for housing assistance, for transit, for public health, for emergency services. That money is not guaranteed. It is negotiated. It is political. And a mayor who has publicly accused the President of the United States of conducting an illegal war of aggression in the middle of an active military escalation has created a political context in which those negotiations become significantly more complicated. This is not speculation. This is how Washington operates. Federal funding decisions are made in political environments by political actors. A mayor who is being openly denounced by prominent members of the president's party in a moment of national security sensitivity is a mayor whose city has just become more vulnerable in those negotiations, regardless of whether his foreign policy analysis was correct. If the next round of federal infrastructure talks gets complicated, if the transit funding package that New York City desperately needs hits unexpected resistance, if housing assistance allocations get squeezed in ways that trace back to political hostility that Mamdani accelerated, the people who pay that price are not Mamdani. They are the constituents Mace told him to worry about, the ones stepping over garbage on their way to work, the ones whose rent he came to office promising to address. That is the sharpest criticism of what Mamdani did. Not that he was wrong, but that he may have been right at the cost of the people he is supposed to protect. Now let us hold that criticism alongside the harder question it produces. If the logic is that a mayor should not say things that anger the federal government because it might cost the city money, where does that logic end? Should Mamdani stay silent on policing because it might upset federal law enforcement funding? Should he avoid commenting on immigration because it might complicate his relationship with federal authorities? Should every position he takes be filtered through the question of whether it protects the city's access to federal resources? That is a coherent governing philosophy. It is also a philosophy that produces mayors who say nothing and stand for nothing, and eventually get replaced by someone else who says nothing and stands for nothing. And cities run by those mayors have their own problems. There is a tension here that does not resolve cleanly, and any analysis that pretends it does is not an analysis. It is a talking point. Mamdani walked into that tension with his eyes open. The question is whether he had a plan for navigating it, or whether he posted that statement without fully thinking through the specific, practical, dollar-denominated consequences for the city he was elected to run. I do not know the answer to that question. Neither do you. But it is the right question. And the next 6 months of New York City politics will tell us a great deal about whether Mamdani understood the full weight of what he did, and whether he has a strategy for managing the fallout that goes beyond defending the substance of his position. Because being right and being strategically effective are not the same thing. A mayor who is right, but cannot translate that rightness into protection and resources, and outcomes for his constituents, has, in a very practical sense, failed the job. Not morally, practically. The moral case for Mamdani's statement is strong. The practical case is still being written. Here is where we are right now, stated plainly. The escalation Mamdani described is underway. The strikes on American bases in the Gulf are the direct consequence of an operation that a significant portion of foreign policy and legal experts considered legally questionable and strategically reckless. The civilians in the region who are dying in a conflict that was not inevitable. It was chosen. Mamdani said that. He said it early, he said it clearly. And the political establishment tried to make the story about his audacity rather than his accuracy. That is a genuine problem, not just for Mamdani, for all of us. When the response to a serious foreign policy argument is to mock the messenger's job title and mention garbage collection, the public conversation gets worse. The questions that deserve serious debate. Was this legal? Who authorized it? What are the strategic objectives? What does success look like? What happens if it fails? Those questions get buried under a culture war argument about whether mayors are allowed to have opinions. That is a mechanism for avoiding accountability, and it should be called what it is. At the same time, and I am going to stay with this uncomfortable point rather than let it go, Mamdani has a responsibility that extends beyond being correct about the direction of history. He has a responsibility to the specific, living, rent-paying, subway-riding people of New York City. And right now, those people need things from the federal government, significant things, expensive things, things that require political capital to obtain. Every fight Mamdani picks on the national stage is a fight that uses political capital. Capital is finite. The question of whether spending it on this particular statement, at this particular moment, in this particular way, was the right allocation. That is not a question Mamdani's supporters want to sit with, but it is the question his constituents deserve an honest answer to. If you live in New York City, here is what you need to be watching. Watch the federal budget negotiations. Watch what happens to the transit funding requests. Watch whether the housing assistance allocations that the city has been counting on materialize on schedule or hit unexpected delays. Watch whether the political hostility that Mamdani accelerated with his statement shows up in practical terms in the resources available to run this city. If it does not, if the federal relationship holds, if the funding comes through, if the political damage stays contained to cable news arguments, then Mamdani made a calculated bet that paid off. He said what needed to be said, absorbed the backlash, and protected his city at the same time. If it does, if the consequences show up in the budget, in the negotiations, in the resources available for housing and transit and public safety, then the story is more complicated. Then the question is whether the moral clarity of his position was worth the material cost to the people he represents. That is not a question that resolves in a news cycle. It resolves over months and years. And this channel will be here for every development, examining what it means for this city in real terms. There is one more thing that needs to be said, and it is about the nature of leadership in a moment like this. Mamdani represents a city that is not monolithic. New York contains multitudes. It contains people who cheered the strikes on Iran and people who wept at the news. It contains veterans and immigrants and families with members on both sides of this conflict in ways that the national conversation never fully captures. It contains people whose first response to the escalation was fear, for family members in the region, for a world that feels less stable than it did yesterday. Those people needed a mayor who saw them, who acknowledged that they existed, who did not treat the moment as a simple binary between supporting military action and staying carefully neutral. Mamdani chose to be that mayor, and in doing so, he accepted everything that came with that choice: the attacks, the political risk, the complicated consequences. The question that remains, the question that is genuinely open, that I do not have a clean answer to, and that you should be sitting with, is this. Is Mamdani's willingness to take those political hits on behalf of the constituents and needed to hear their mayor's voice a sign of the kind of leadership New York City needs? Or is it a sign of a leader who is still learning where moral courage ends and political recklessness begins? The answer matters, not in the abstract, not for Mamdani's legacy or his national profile, or his political future beyond Gracie Mansion. It matters because this city has real problems that require federal cooperation, state partnership, and political capital to solve. And the way Mamdani manages the consequences of his choices over the next several months will tell us a great deal about whether he understands the full weight of the office he holds. He may be exactly the kind of mayor this city needs for this moment. He may be a leader who says the things that matter, absorbs the cost, and finds a way to govern effectively through the backlash. Some of the best leaders in American urban history were leaders who said the uncomfortable thing and then figured out how to make the city work anyway. Or he may be learning, in real time, that governing a city of 8 million people requires a form of discipline that goes beyond being on the right side of history. That discipline is not about silence. It is about knowing when to speak, and how to protect the people you represent from the fallout of the fights you choose. The missiles are still in the air, the embassy is evacuated, the region is on edge, and New York City is watching its mayor navigate something that no job description fully prepares you for. What do you think he should do next? Not what he should have said. What should he do now, today, with the situation as it stands? The war is escalating, the backlash is real, the federal relationship is strained, and 8 million people are waiting to see whether their mayor is going to lead or retreat. Leave your answer in the comments. This is the conversation New York City needs to have, not on cable news, not in Ted Cruz's office, but here, among the people who actually live with what happens next. This story is not over. It is not close to over. The legal challenges to the strikes are forming. The humanitarian reporting is coming. The congressional debate that should have happened before the bombs dropped is going to happen now, after them, in the worst possible sequence. And every development will be here, examined in terms of what it means for this city and the people who call it home. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and if you want the full context of Mamdani's first confrontation with the Iran backlash, the one where Cruz and Mace made their first move, watch the video on your screen. It is essential to understanding where we are today.